So as you mentioned, I'm out of Austin, Texas. I primarily work with a ministry there called Luke 4:18 Ministries. It's a healing and deliverance ministry that the Lord used to set me free about, 3 years ago. So shout out to Luke 4:18. About 6 months ago, the Lord really put on my heart the importance of bread, and particularly daily bread. And as I began to just sort of press into what that meant, first I was like, sure, daily bread. We should be in your word every day. I got it. Yeah. And he's like, no, like actual bread's important.
Wow.
And so I sort of sat with that for a minute, and it wasn't until I realized, sort of stepping back and saying, well, what does the world say about it versus what does the word say about it? And I began to see this discrepancy. In the world, when we get sick or have allergies or these sorts of things, the first thing the world says is, stop eating gluten. You have gluten intolerance, celiac. And yet the word says something totally different. Yeshua said, give us this day our daily bread. And I'm pretty certain he wasn't worried about gluten intolerance when he said that. And so I just sort of sat with that for a little bit, and I said, Lord, you say one thing and the world says something different. Where do I go with that? What does that mean? What are you trying to show me? And it wasn't shortly after that the Lord put some information in front of me, and I'll go into who that individual was in a little bit, but I realized really quickly that the issue is the way in which the bread's being prepared, and specifically the flour. What I realized is that when you grind the wheat berry, first of all, God gave us this like beautiful, perfect wheat berry with everything we need inside of it, contained in this like powerhouse capsule that will store indefinitely. They found wheat, 3,000-year-old wheat from Egypt that's perfectly fine. It was stored correctly. You can put it in the ground today and it will grow an ancient grain. It's 3,000 years old. And all the nutrients are still encapsulated and all right there. The food industry, about 100 years ago, decided, they started out with the mills in town. People would come and you'd get you'd get the grain at the mill, and you'd get your sort of daily or weekly or however often you would go to the mill to get your grain from the local mill. What they realized there is that you couldn't store that grain because it would go rancid. However, after a bit of processing, you realize when you get rid of the bran and the germ, you can store the white flour and it won't go rancid. So this was like a great innovation, right? Suddenly you couldn't store flour, and now you can store flour and you can ship it anywhere you want to. The issue I realized really quickly is that when you grind the wheat berry, within 24 hours, more than 50% of the nutrients oxidize away. Let me say that one more time. When you grind the wheat berry, within 24 hours, more than 50% of the nutrients oxidize away. What oxidizes away are all the things that help you process the gluten. And so the bran and the germ, which they were now getting rid of and feeding into the swine industry, literally making the pigs fat and happy, and preserving this white flour to give to the human population, that white flour without the bran and the germ is why you can't process the gluten. The bran and the germ is what allows you to process the endosperm, because it's all packaged perfectly together. It's like almost like God knew what he was doing. Crazy, right? So I just, that was sort of the beginning of what Daily Breadz was for me, just sort of looking at that and understanding there's a lot to this, and it comes at a cost when you're doing it the world's way. And yet when we step back from that and say, Lord, you know what you're doing. What did you intend initially what did you mean initially for us to do with all this? When we sort of step back and realize it's amazing just sort of what he has and the revelation that we've been given. I want to start, before I go into some of the detail, really what I want to do here today is make everyone understand that this is something we can all do. It's really simple. I'll go into some of the more technical things, but I intentionally brought a really basic setup here so that you can realize that anyone can do this. It's incredibly healthy, and it's possible just to get started. And so I want to go through some of the resources that are available. But before I do that, I want to just share with you what the Lord's really put on my heart. I began about 2 years ago to begin working with the homeless in Austin downtown under the bridge every week with Church Under the Bridge. And we realized really quickly that what the city in Austin was doing wasn't an effective solution. And that we realized that the body of Christ would be the ones that are responsible for his solution, a kingdom solution. And we started an organization called Hope on the Way, and I'm excited to see what the Lord's going to do with that. When I had this revelation about grain, it became really clear to me that this was a solution that would benefit the homeless population, the unhoused community, because it addresses gut issues, it addresses health issues, it provides people food. And when you raise up a homeless population, an unhoused community, and you give them a way to make bread for themselves and for the community, it provides dignity to them, for themselves and for their community, to say, look, I made this, eat it. It's food for all of us. And when you combine that with the understanding that we're entering into some really crazy times globally, and you understand that famine is ahead, famine's coming. It says so in the Word. When you begin to look through Revelation, when that third horse arrives, you get a white horse, man of peace shows up, and you got war, probably a really simple war, and then shortly after that, we'll have a famine and hyperinflation. It's the black horse that comes right before 2 billion of the people in the world die. 1/4 of the world's population, that's the fourth horse. Third horse, famine and hyperinflation. So we know that's coming at some point. If we know famine's coming, how do we prepare for it? If we look to a biblical solution, when Joseph knew there was famine coming, he stored grain. That's the solution that the Lord gave him, was to store grain. And so right now, and I'll just, daily breads, so the problem is that the food industry abandoned biblical principles of milling grain, leaving storable white flour devoid of its nutritional value. And so if you understand that's the problem, what's the solution? I would suggest that the solution is to go back to biblical principles. It says in the Word in Exodus, you shall serve the Lord your God, and he will bless your bread and your water, and will take sickness away from you. As we've introduced daily bread into our ministry and into the community, we've seen sickness leave. We've seen a woman that was in her 80s that had a blood disorder her whole life, last 40 years at least. Within 2 weeks of starting on daily bread, that go away entirely, and her doctor had no idea why. Nothing changed except that she started eating daily bread. We've seen gut issues resolved. We've seen rashes go away. We've seen all sorts of amazing things simply by doing what the world says don't do. By adding bread into your diet, not taking it away. But the correct kind of bread that's milled daily and made daily. So why Daily Breadz? Daily Breadz is delivering a clarion call to local communities to store grain now. I literally have a 3 mandate 3-word mandate from the Lord. It's really simple. I love it when he makes things really clear and really simple. Store grain now. Store grain now. There's all sorts of things that I see on the horizon that we're doing with the homeless and all sorts of different things, but the people that I have that have come alongside and really captured this vision with me, they're saying, hey, what do we do about this? What do we do about this? Well, I'm like, stop. None of that's important right now, because if something shifts in the world, and it takes very little for the entire supply chain to get shut down. We've seen that. If something shifts and you can't get grain anymore, then all those things, all that vision that the Lord gave me for all this amazing things to help and benefit our local communities means absolutely nothing. So I'm going to say it one more time. Store grain now. 3-word mandate. Locally, as a ministry, we empower unhoused communities in Austin to mill and bake daily bread, providing access to food, jobs, and healthy living. Quite simple. So Sue Becker is, when I mentioned earlier that when I first sort of had this revelation, the Lord put someone in front of me. That's this woman right here. Came through the form of a YouTube video that I just sort of dug into, and she's got this amazing teaching where she just talks about bread. She's got a bread ministry in Georgia, and she really goes into the biblical foundation of bread, a lot of scripture about what the word says about it, and I could go into that today with you, but she does a way more elegant teaching on that than I could do. And so I encourage you to go look up Sue Becker on YouTube. In fact, if you go to Breadz, Breadz.com, that's the website for this. If you go to dailybreadz.com, you'll see her video at the top. I have a quick teaching at the top, just with what the Lord gave me at the very beginning of all this, and then Sue Becker's teachings underneath it. If you have to go watch any video, go watch her video. It's amazing, and it will shift your understanding about all of these things. She basically is the Joseph of Georgia. She's been storing grain for a long time, and has just an understanding of the times that we're in. And more importantly, that when I first had this vision, I reached out to her. I just called her and I said, "Hey Sue," she called me back. I said, "Hey Sue, I've got this. I feel like the Lord put it on my heart to do this as a ministry for the homeless." And she said, "Thank goodness, I've been looking for someone." She wanted to do it in Atlanta, but it hadn't worked out for her. She said, like the Lord put on her heart a long time ago that this would be an amazing ministry specifically for the homeless. And when I began to ask her about that and sort of what she saw, she said, "Well, I've already proven it in Haiti." In Haiti, she took 4 or 5 children in middle school. Middle schoolers. She took middle schoolers with no understanding about anything. Little middle schoolers. And she taught them how to make bread. So you got little kids that are now every single day, 5 kids, making bread for between 500 and 800 people in their community. 5 kids. They're now in high school. They graduate this year. She's been paying them double the wage of a normal person in Haiti. They don't get to keep any of their money. All their money goes into a savings account for them, so when they graduate high school, they now have a savings account. These 5 kids have decided to buy land, start a school, do amazing things in that community. That's 5 kids. It blew my mind when I realized what she had proven out. And so when I look at what needs to be done in Austin and in local communities around the world, storing grain and then making daily breads for a local community has been proven to work. It's been proven effective. Many of the kids in Haiti, this is the only thing they get to eat every day. It's their only meal. And yet, when you make bread using a recipe out of the Bible, which we'll talk about in a little bit, in Ezekiel lived on bread for 390 days without eating anything else, lived on his side. Almost like God knew what he was doing when he gave you a recipe for grain bread in the Bible that had beans and lentils in it, which makes it a complete protein. So when you understand that you can store all of those things indefinitely, And then you can make daily bread for yourself and your community. It's incredibly empowering. So, after I began to look at Sue Becker, I'll just mention this scripture which she pulled up. One of her, Sue loves good food. So I'm just gonna read this. Why do you spend your money for that which is not bread, and your labor for that which does not satisfy? Listen diligently to me, and eat what is good, and delight yourselves in rich food. The Lord's not looking for us to go starve ourselves. He's not looking for us to go eat terrible food. Delicious bread made daily is scrumptious. It's delicious. Add a little hot butter to it. It's so good. It's so good. So,
raspberry spread. And honey, right?
Honey is delicious too, yes.
Oh, yeah.
So I want to go through a few things that are simple. I just want to, talking about all these things is one thing, but how do you actually get started and how do you do it? And I want to really just simplify it for us today. I don't want to get into crazy things. I just want to say, like, this is what I want to talk about. Some things you need. You got to have a grain mill. You got to have a way to grind your wheat. If you got wheat berries and they're not ground, unless you get a stone. Get a grain mill. We'll talk about some of the ones that are helpful. Other equipment. Do you need it? Do you not need it? We'll talk about that. Types of grain. We'll mention those. Some of the ancient grains. Some of the ones that are gluten-free anyway. Some of the ones that have other stuff. We'll go through that. Where do you buy your grain? Crazy resource I found last night. And some other things. And then recipes. What do you do? How do you make it? We'll talk about these things. So the first thing, which grain mill? First thing you gotta have is you gotta have a grain mill. I have 3 different grain mills shown here. The first one's the one that I have. It's called a Wonder Mill. It's the one that Sue Becker recommended for me, and so that's the one I got. Second one's called a Nutri-Mill. There's all sorts of different varieties. And the third one's a Country Living grain mill. My suggestion is get an electric mill because you'll actually use it, and it takes very little time, like 30 seconds, and you can grind all the grain that you need to make your stuff. If you're going to get a manual crank, get a good one. My actual suggestion is to get a grain mill and get a backup as a manual. If you're just going to get a manual, get a good manual one. Get that one. You can get a little cheap one for like 20 bucks. I talked to a guy that was trying to do this on the cheap. He got one for 20 bucks. It took him 40 minutes to grind food for one loaf of bread. That's not sustainable. It's not effective. Don't do that. So the biggest investment you have in this is the grain mill up front. It's the piece of equipment that you have to be able to do this. So you're looking at $200, $300 to be able for a grain mill. One of those are all in that range. And there's different resources you can go to find them online, but if you search for those 3 words, and I'll give you guys access to this when we're done, you'll be able to find those and just make an educated decision on which one you want. If you have to just get one, ask the Lord which one to get. So again, I got the Wonder Mill with the backup as the Country Living coming. Any other equipment that you need? The answer is no. You need any other equipment. Here's 2 things that if you had to get anything else, this is what you'd get. The first one's the Zoji-Rushi bread maker. It's what we use at Luke 4:18. You put all the ingredients in, push a button, you don't do anything, and 2 hours later you get a loaf of perfect, hot, delicious bread. It's a wonderful solution. It's like 300 bucks. But if you want to like totally simplify it, get that thing. The second thing is a dough mixer. You don't need that unless you're doing it industrially. So that's what we're doing in Austin. We're going to get one of these. And that then allows us to make big batches of dough at one time. I asked Sue, what's the biggest thing? And I was imagining this like huge dough mixer, and she's like, no, just get that. That's what they use in Haiti. So 4 kids can use this and make food for 400 to 800 people a day. It's sufficient. So if you need, but you don't need either of those things. When I make bread at home, I use the mill. I grind my wheat. I make flour by hand and put it in the oven. You need a pan to put it in, loaf pan. And you just bake it in the oven. So I guess you need an oven as well, but most of you have that. So how do you make bread? It's a great question. We'll go through the process of making flour here in a little bit. But you're going to need a recipe book. I recommend the one that's on the screen, the Essential Home Ground Flour Book. That's Sue Becker's book. It's got all kinds of delicious recipes in it. It's like $10 on Amazon, 20 bucks maybe, I don't know. Get that book. It's got all the recipes you need. Making bread from fresh ground flour is different than making bread from other, like the white flour you get in the store. It's different. It's got a different consistency. You have the brand and the germ in there, so all the recipes will be different. You'll need a recipe book. She's got that one, and she's got a red recipe book. Get either one of them. That's the full one with everything in it. I reckon it's worth getting it. If you have questions on what to do, Sue Becker's YouTube channel has amazing resources on it. You can sit and watch hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, which I've done, on how to make bread. Locally, there's a place called Bethlehem Harvest. It's the most local thing I found here. It's a woman out of Houston. Equally love of bread to Sue Becker. I've not met her or spoken with her personally, but the people that introduced me to her said that she has a passion for teaching people, and you can go on her site and see that she's doing teachings all the time about how to make bread. So I encourage you to look those resources up. Types of ancient grains. I'm just going to list some of these here. And the ones on, what's that, the left, are the ones that have gluten in them. The ones on the other side are grains that do not have gluten in them. There's more grains in this, but these are just some of the basic ones. Barley or einkorn. Einkorn is really interesting. Einkorn is probably the most ancient of the ancient grains. In fact, of all the ones on this side that have gluten in them, einkorn has the least amount of gluten in it. It's been the one that's been messed with the least. And there's a lot of really interesting teachings on einkorn, where it came from, and just that's probably the closest we have to what Yeshua was eating, is einkorn. That's probably what was growing in the fields during that time. Einkorn is a little bit more expensive than the rest of it, but it's out there, it's available right now. Each one of these things has a different consistency, make a different kind of bread, have different flavors, different tastes. Over on the gluten-free side, some of those, like teff is what you have out of Ethiopia. Yeah, Ethiopia, sort of a rubbery consistency. It's what they use to like mop up all their food and all their meals. Crazy health benefits. And each one of these has a different sort of health benefit. And I'll let you sort of explore those on your own. If you have, I guess, specific questions about some of them, we can talk about those. But needless to say, there's a lot of different grains that are available to us. And all of these you can buy as the whole grain. And when you buy it that way and store it correctly, it stores indefinitely. It's beautiful. Another verse. This is the one out of the Bible that has the recipe for bread. And you take wheat and barley, beans and lentils, millet and spelt, put them in a single vessel, and make your bread from them. It says for them, from them. Wheat, barley, the beans and the lentils, what gives you the complete protein. Millet, spelt, put them all together, grind them up, one vessel, add a little oil, a little honey, and you have a delicious, full protein meal. You can literally eat bread as a complete meal. It's amazing. And filling, and delicious.
Have you done it?
I have done it, yes. I'm in the middle of a fast right now. Yes. So where do you buy grain? All sorts of different options. Breadbeckers.com is the one that I went to the very first. She's out of Georgia. You can buy grain from there. It's expensive to ship. Anytime you're buying grain, the expensive thing is shipping. And so when we get to the bottom of these, I found an amazing solution last night. So Breadbeckers is where we bought our stuff from to begin with. It's all packaged really well, does a great job, but you gotta pay for shipping it over here. And she told me initially, she said, don't buy your grain from me unless you're buying it in bulk, because I gotta ship it all the way over to Texas and find someone locally. So locally, Grapevine grains, they deal with the shipping issue by not shipping. So if you want, they're up in Grapevine, we got people that go up there and we call them grain drops. And you go up there and we order in bulk as a ministry, a bunch of people order together, and then one guy goes up there, picks it up for everyone and brings it back down. They do ship locally up near Grapevine, Dallas area, but they don't ship anywhere else, and that's because of the crazy shipping costs. The third one, Bethlehem Harvest, that's probably the most local one here. Bethlehem Harvest is based out of Houston and does great things. I have not ordered from them personally, but I was given their name yesterday and when I was looking for resources to share with you guys, and I've heard really good things about them. All these people have organic grains, and so I think when you're doing this, the importance of getting the organics really, if you're going to go buy the stuff that's not been blasted with all the glyphosate and that type of things. Do you have a question?
No, Azuri Standard actually is, they'll bring it to the city or whatever.
Yeah, so the last one's what I'm going to talk about right now, yeah. Azure Standard is what I found last night. So I was looking, I was like, Lord, where do you want me to show them? And as I was looking for things, I found Azure Standard. So I put that as a big one because it's the solution specifically for what you guys are doing and for what we're doing in Austin. So Azure Standard, Standard of Healthy and Abundant Living, and they do what they call drop zones. So anyone can sign up to become a drop zone if you have a place where a big semi-truck can come and park.
So we just actually did it for the first time like 2 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we're the local one here. I think it's the closest one is like insurance. Is where we picked up. And yeah, everybody helps unload the truck. It's so cool. Like you have to unload the truck yourself, and
You can order as much as you want.
yeah. So it is a good source. We've used them. So.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. So just for the purpose of recording, as she said, when you go and when you order from them, the truck will show up wherever the drop zone is, and you go and you pick up, and you help unload the truck yourself. You can order as much as you want or as little as you want. Actually, there's a $50 minimum fee that you're going to spend anyways, and then the minimum of the drop zone is $500. And they do that, I believe, once a month-ish. The next one, you got to order by February 4th. And so as I was looking last night and looking at this, I realized this is a great solution. This is a really good solution. Not only, it's like the Lord's called me to store a lot of grain, not a little grain. And so I was looking on there, and you can buy a 1-ton pallet, so 2,000 pounds in a pallet. And there's only 15 available in the US, and I called my guy last night and I said, hey, I think I found a solution. It's half the price of everything else we're looking at. And he said, let's get them all. So ADRN in Austin, Texas signed off on a new warehouse last week. They closed on it, which now has a place for us to store that. So I have a meeting with them this week coming up and asking permission to store 15 to 20 tons of grain in their new warehouse that's a week old. So the Lord's moving. That happened literally, I found that last night. You guys used it last week?
Yeah,
2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago you used it. I found it last night. The Lord told me that's what I should share with you guys today. As I found it, I found that grain there is cheaper, organic grain there is cheaper than half the price of anything else I found when you buy it in the actual huge size. And as we were, sorry, I was texting in the middle of your presentation this morning. It's because my guy was asking me, hey, how do I do this? Let's move. He's like, what are the next steps? I want to move forward on this. So that's this morning as I was sitting in here was when we as a ministry moved forward on that project. So it's cool.
Awesome.
Praise God.
It really is a lot less expensive. I mean, when we were there in line, you get in line and they have the system that you unload, and the people in front of us had ordered a crazy amount of stuff. And you could hear their conversation with someone that was talking to them, and they were saying, because they sell all types of stuff. I mean, they were ordering chicken feed, and they were ordering it, and somebody asked them, like, hey, how did you find out about it? This is our first time, and we found out through a local church, and they said, everything we've looked at, this is half the price. So it kind of seems to be the standard that they have, inexpensive prices than other places.
Yeah, and just to just tag on to that, yeah, they don't just sell grain. They've got all sorts of things. For anyone that's looking like homesteading type stuff, like go on their site, look at their Because all the things that are expensive to ship, they deal with that through drop zones. You gotta unload it yourself, but you save a ton of money doing it. And so, yeah, as your standard, what an amazing solution for such a time as this. Store grain now. I'm gonna say it one more time. Store grain now. 3-word mandate. Store grain now. For whoever has a bountiful eye will be blessed, for he shares his bread with the poor. Instead of Proverbs. And then buy the 25 or 50 pound bags, pour them in yourselves. If you do that, get a gamma lid, G-A-M-M-A. A gamma lid allows you to spin the lid on and off. So you make a tight seal on it, and then you spin it on and off. So you don't need that for all of your buckets. You just need one bucket that you use that you go to get stuff out of. If you get hard red and hard white, then I'd get 2 different buckets. So you've got a hard red bucket and a hard white bucket, or however many different varieties of grain you get. If you're just going to get one variety of grain, I'd probably say start with a hard red. If you had to go to 2 grains of variety, I'd say hard red, 2-part hard red, 1-part hard white. A soft white is what you would use if you're someone that likes to make pastries, breads, those type things. It's different than what you'd make bread out of. But if for each one of those you have a different bucket with a gamma lid for it, and if you need to store more, then you just store them in just the normal pail with the lid that locks on tight, and that's a cheaper lid. Then if you have a bigger solution, I mean, when you're doing it in like 1 ton, like 2,000 pounds, it comes in a big white grain sack, and I don't really know what I'm doing yet, so I'm still learning.
Can you use those down they're like food grade, but they look like trash cans?
Yeah, that's another good resource. So the 55 gallons, the 55-gallon drum, that's a perfect solution. So actually there's a resource outside of Austin that has food grade 55-gallon drums available for $25 each if anyone wants any. They're metal drums. They're food grade. I don't know what he had in them before, but he's got as many as we need. And I have access to them. He's in Dale, Texas, just south of Austin. And so probably what I have coming on those pallets is going to get moved into those. I mean, the Lord highlighted that to me about 6 months ago, those buckets, and I was like, I don't know why I'm like seeing these, but I realized I needed to buy a bunch of them. So, yes, ma'am.
How long does a 5-gallon bucket last? Like how long is the duration in regards to what you're making out of it?
With regard to how long does 1 5-gallon bucket last if you're making
Daily bread.
if you're making it daily? Well, so it depends on how much daily bread you're making. So at Luke 4:18, we make a loaf of bread every single day, but that's because everyone that comes in that house gets bread. It literally gets shared with. If you come into the ministry house, there's always fresh bread there. Since about 6 months ago, there's just always bread. It's one of those amazing things, like you don't make bread for yourselves, you make it to share. And so there's always bread going on there. And how often would you say we go through?
It's hard for me to even guess. I mean, months, maybe?
I think maybe a bucket a month.
That'd be a good start.
Yeah, a bucket a month if you're doing that. But if you're doing it, if you're not doing it that way, you're just making bread for your family, that obviously would extend a lot more. But what we don't realize is that like the bread we get in the store is it's lacking so many nutrients that you go to eat it and you're like, I need more. When you eat it like one piece of bread that's like actual bread, suddenly you get full, and your gut's like, oh thanks, got what I needed, I'm good. I didn't mention this. All the nutrients and supplements that people are taking, DHA, vitamin A, all these things that like the supplement industry is like push on us, say, hey, you guys are missing that. It's all inside the wheat berry. It's all inside the wheat berry. It's crazy. Yes, ma'am.
So in regards to storing it, right? Can you go in and out? Like if you start off with a little bit and then you're adding to? I guess what I'm trying to say is like, can it be exposed to light and this
Sure.
and that? Okay, so that it doesn't matter how many times you go into it, you can still store it and it'll be fine, right?
Right. So there's some ways to store it if you're going to keep it indefinitely. There's ways that you would store it that would suck the oxygen out of it. But if you're once you open it and you're using it, yeah, you can. It's no big deal to open it. And
Okay, but
grab
there
it.
are two different things. If you want to store it indefinitely.
Yeah, if you want to store for like 25 years or whatever, then there's ways to do that. And some of them, like when you buy from Sue Becker, they're already done that way. So she sucks all the oxygen out of them, and there's methods that you can look online on how to do that. Sometimes dry ice, different versions of how to do that. Other questions?
Drying out of it? What are we drying out of?
You don't need to worry about it. That's to store for 25 years. We're not. Yeah, you're gonna use it for that.
Just need to make it into the next few, right?
Okay, wait.
Charles.
I was just say on the how much bucket thing. I mean, just real quick, how much of a cup of grain is required to make a loaf? Like,
Yeah, cool. So that'll lead us right into this. So this is grain for 1 loaf of bread, but like a super dense, delicious loaf. What's in this?
Everything on that list. So there's hard red, there's spelt, millet, lentils.
Oh, cool. So this is the Ezekiel bread mix we got right here. So that is hard red, spelt, barley, millet, lentils, Great Northern beans, red kidney beans, pinto beans. What's this? Why don't we go ahead and make this?
They're dried beans?
All dried beans, yeah. So, where's Christian?
Right here.
You want to come make some bread for us?
Yeah.
So what's cool, you guys locally, you have like Breadman here, who has a crazy understanding of bread more so than I do, because he used to work commercially in a bread kitchen.
Yeah. So just a little bit about my bread experience. First of all, thank you for your time and energy, guys. This is super, empowering, encouraging that everybody's here is taking time to see how we can make things happen. So I worked for the New World Bakery, and I apprenticed under the head baker for 5 years, and we were a mass production bakery. So every day we averaged 4.5 tons of dough a day, and we were, industrial. Our mixing bowls were 500 pounds each, and we had a CRM that we just plug in the numbers, the yield we wanted, and then it will give us all that fun stuff. But in that 5 years, I was able to mess with all types of dough, and during the mixing process and all that, it's real personal. So hopefully the Lord could help me recollect all my knowledge, and then I'll show you guys. But it's super easy. Bread is math plus science and love. I feel like that's what we're made out of, so it's cool. But yeah, let's get started.
I'm just going to narrate as you go through it. So I mentioned earlier that some of the mills I showed you up there, this is Gail's setup. She doesn't use any of those mills. She actually already had a blender at her house, a Vitamix blender. And so if you have a good blender, turns out you don't need one of those expensive mills.
It goes on for 1 minute.
It goes on for 1 minute. Watch this.
So put your time. So if you had one of the other mills, it would take about half that time, but you don't need one of the other things. So my point today was that anyone can do this. Many of you already have that exact machine or something similar in your home. So you can go ahead and start. So I'll just sort of, as you go through this, narrate. But I really want to make the point, like, this is something that we can all do and we can all begin to do. You don't need a bunch of fancy stuff or equipment, or you do need a mill, but as it turns out, a blender can also become a mill. And if anyone wants to come up and look at that, it's perfect flour. But it's flour that has the
Yeah,
germ,
everything.
and the bran, and the endosperm, all inside of it. We didn't get rid of anything, feed it to a bunch of pigs. So the process is really simple. Those are the dry ingredients. Then the wet ingredients in this recipe is 2 cups of water.
4 cups.
No, 2 cups is half. Everything's half.
Oh.
Yeah, so 2 cups.
Oh, and all that salt,
That's already all in there.
that's already on?
Yeah, all the dry ingredients already. She mixed all that in there, I think.
I don't think
Gail,
there's salt in
oh,
there.
it's not salt in there. Gail prepared this for us. All the pieces. This is a community effort. So you're gonna need 2 cups of water. 1, boom.
Since this is a half recipe, how big of a batch will this make? Is it 1 loaf?
This is gonna make 1 big loaf.
Actually, this would be a great recipe to put in your newsletter.
Yes.
So
This
you
is a
can-
perfect recipe for the
You can take a
newsletter.
picture of that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so this recipe comes from Sue Becker. Actually, the recipe itself, it's the ingredients that come out of Ezekiel 4:9, but a woman about, 5 or 10 years ago felt like the Lord gave her a dream, and in that dream, she was given exact proportions of the different things in Ezekiel. And so this recipe actually comes directly from that woman's vision, and it's delicious. So that's what we use.
We're gonna put the grocery stores out of business for Ezekiel bread.
So Ezekiel, I want to talk about that. So the Ezekiel bread that you get in the store, if you watch on dailybreadz.com and you look at the first video I had up on there, it was like the very first thing the Lord gave me. I had a loaf of Ezekiel bread next to me, which a guy in my small group had given me just when I began talking about this. He's like, I got a loaf of that in my freezer. So he went and just gave it to me. And so that was sitting next to me in that video. But that bread that you get in the store tastes like cardboard.
Yeah.
It's not good. And the reason for it is they use the ingredients out of the Bible, but they didn't make it from a biblical way. They don't grind any of the stuff that's in it. It's called, literally, if you read inside of it, it says flourless bread. They don't grind it and make flour out of it. They sprout it and make the bread out of sprouted grains, which is not what was done in the Bible. There's a reason that millstones are mentioned so many times biblically. In fact, in Deuteronomy, one of the verses that really stood out to me when I began looking at this was talking about debts and taking debts for people. It says don't be a debtor, don't do these things. And it says when you're taking something in exchange for someone, the one thing you cannot take is the millstone, because taking it is like taking someone's life. Some translations say livelihood, but that's not what the actual word there is. The word says life. Taking it takes someone's life. And when you understand the health implications of what's happened to our whole world when the millstone's been taken out of people's homes.
For Texans, that's like taking your horse.
Right. Yeah, for Texans, it's like taking your horse. I like it.
You don't leave them out of the house.
Half a cup of honey. Actually, I'm gonna do the oil first. This is a good tip for everyone. It's the same amount of oil and honey. So if you do the oil before you do the honey, then the honey comes out really easy.
Yeah.
And then another thing is to have keep the salt and yeast separated, and then once you start mixing, just so the glutinization process doesn't start.
Correct.
Sorry, can you say that?
Yeah, when you're mixing it, put the
Salt and yeast.
salt and yeast. Keep it separated until the end. Actually, when you go to make
Mix
it,
the dry mix.
yeah, well, mix the dry. Well,
Dry.
but keep the. I'll say it in a simpler way.
Okay.
Keep the yeast out until the end. Put the yeast in last. That way, when it mixes, that's when the activation starts of the yeast.
Oh,
And so
so all the dry.
I learned that tip of putting the oil first and then the honey from Sue Becker. New honey.
New honey.
As he's making this, anyone else have any other questions?
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
What happens if you don't put yeast in it?
What happens if you don't put yeast in it? It does not rise.
That's not right.
But you can still make it?
You're going to make unleavened bread,
Unleavened.
and it's not going to be as delicious.
And some of the recipes will fail dramatically, and there's other recipes that are like call for no yeast. And so you can make unleavened bread, but the yeast is what makes it rise. So that when the yeast activates it releases air bubbles, or the chemical reaction essentially releases air bubbles, which make little bubbles inside the bread. And then when you cook those bubbles together, those little air pockets get stored, yes.
So aside from the nutritional value, but financially, like what would be the cost comparison between you making your own loaf and like we know if we go to the store you can get a loaf of bread.
Yeah, this costs more than a loaf of bread in the store.
This does?
Yeah,
Okay.
for sure it does, but it's because it's actual nutrition.
Okay.
If you think about it though, if you're only eating this, which you can do, it saves crazy amount of money.
Because it's a meal.
Because it's a whole meal. And so some people look at it and they're like, oh, now my bread costs have gone up. Well, yeah, but your nutrient cost went way down. What the Lord showed me initially is there's not a more inexpensive way to feed the homeless population, to have them mill and bake their own daily bread. So people have come at me and said, well, no, it's not. There's other ways to do it that are at least less expensive. And I said, yeah, what are you feeding them? Yeah, I can give them what they're eating right now, but like, look at the results in their life. And when you remove that poison food from them and you begin to give them actual food, it provides the physical side of it. We know that there's many aspects to healing. There's an emotional side of it, there's a spiritual side of it, but there's a physical side of it as well. And when you can use this to attack the physical side of it, and you bring deliverance on the spiritual side of it, it's a really powerful combination. Inner healing on the emotional side of it. The amount of results we've seen from people coming off of drugs entirely with no side effects. It's really, really powerful. I mean, it's only the Lord. It's only the Lord. And this is, I believe, one of the strategies that He's given the body of Christ to empower us as a community to help bring healing into people's lives.
So on the mixers, there's 2 settings, and the first setting is a slow mix to let all the ingredients get together. So, eyeball it 3 to 5 minutes slow, and then once it gets at the right consistency, that's when you would, whip the dough. So, I mean, if you got demons you need to work out, or, you're just frustrated, by all means, and I'm gonna try my best handmade. But, I do suggest with the mixers, because they have those 2 different settings. So the first setting is at a low spot place, so all the ingredients, the yeast and the salt and the water could all start the activation. And then the second part, which is way more faster and a little bit longer, just helps solidify the glutenization.
Awesome. I'm gonna frustrate you just a little bit because you're not gonna get the consistency you're looking for with that.
Okay.
This particular recipe doesn't come into, you don't get the tackiness of what you would get if you're making like a basic loaf recipe.
Okay.
So I know what you'd be used to looking for because of the ingredients in this recipe. It's different.
Right.
And so, each recipe, as you sort of work with it, has a consistency you're looking for. If you read the instructions on this one, it'll say you're not going to get the stretchiness of the bread that you're looking for. And there's a reason for that. That stretchiness is actually the gluten. So this actually, because it's got beans and lentils and other stuff in it, besides that, you have less of the gluten to make the stretchiness. And yes, ma'am.
So when do you know that it's ready? I know that some recipes, if you mix it too much, then it doesn't rise as well, or there's things that don't happen. So what does it need to look like? What does the texture need to be where we know, okay, we need to stop and put this in the oven now?
Yeah, I got you. So trial and error is my suggestion.
Oh, okay.
And each loaf will be different. So this one I know, because this is one I make most often, you don't ever get that consistency that you would normally expect. Like, you're not going to be able to turn this into something that you can knead. Like that loaf will never be like a kneadable loaf. So I would literally like pour that into a bread pan and let it sit. When that rises to about 3/4 the length of the bread pan, then you pop in the oven. If you let this one rise too high, then it will collapse. And so there's different, but if it does that, so this one I've experimented with a lot. It's my favorite recipe. And so the first time I made this, I let it rise too high and it collapsed, and I was like, oh, what do I do? And then I looked up Sue Becker online. She says, oh, just knead it again. So then I kneaded it again, let it re-rise. It didn't rise quite as high, and then was able to bake it. So.
Now, this was God's recipe for a sustainable Ezekiel generation, right?
Correct. Correct.
So it's the full Happy Meal.
Amen. Amen. Yeah, this is the actual Happy Meal.
The actual.
What kind
Yes.
of yeast do they?
Oh, yeah.
That's a good question. So one of the issues, the question is what kind of yeast is recommended. When we were first began this process, our bread was great, and then suddenly all of our bread stopped rising. And we were having all kinds of issues, and we couldn't figure out what was going on. Like, what is going on? We realized, once we got some new yeast, that we had some bad yeast. And that immediately fixed all the issues with rising. So yeast is one of those things that you need to store correctly. Don't let it get too hot. You can, once you open it, you'll store it in the fridge. At HEB, I buy the organic yeast at HEB. The little, something like Green Hill or something, little packets. The little packets are exactly the amount to make one of these loaves. I'm investigating right now what the bulk solution is for yeast, and my current answer is I don't know.
How's that consistency?
I think it's perfect, brother.
How's that?
So that you're gonna let sit. Yeah, kind of glossy. So you're gonna let that sit for about 30 minutes before you pop that into an oven. It looks like a good cake batter. Yeah, you want to walk it around and show people. Not quite. That one's not quite as satisfying as the basic dough recipe, which allows you to like really pound it and like get your hands into it.
So this one, when he did, that was it?
That's it. That's it. That's what you do if you don't have the Zojirushi machine.
Okay.
So you saw how much work that was. That's how you make a loaf of bread that's delicious.
Yeah.
The Zojirushi machine does all that for you. You just push a button and it does it.
Okay.
But you don't need that. Like my point today was you don't need all that fancy. I showed you what that stuff was, but you don't need all that fancy stuff. So it's helpful. Yes, ma'am.
How long does it keep after you make it?
Another good question. How long does it keep after you make it? It will go bad within about a week. If you leave it out, you can put it in the fridge. It keeps it longer. At Luke 4:18, it doesn't last more than a day because we eat it. So what you'll realize is that you get, like when I come home, this is what I want to eat. I don't like have these like cravings for other sweet stuff or anything anymore. Like my body's like, that's food. And it's like actual has the nutrients that my body wants and needs. And so when I begin craving things, it's like food, bread. Yes, ma'am.
So you said it loses its nutritional value like 50% after the first 24 hours. So if you make a loaf of bread,
You need to eat it.
No. Okay, so here's the cool thing. So when you grind the wheat berry, 50% of the nutrients oxidize away if you leave it as flour. When you turn it into bread, it captures all the nutrients.
Nice.
And so those nutrients will be there until you eat them. Your nutrients don't oxidize away. You don't have to like pound a loaf of bread to capture those nutrients. Yeah, good question. Thank you
so
for.
it'll keep the whole week.
Yes. Yeah, a lot of people, what they're doing is they're making one loaf at the beginning of the week and then eating that loaf throughout the week. You know.
Oh, yeah.
And it's the way to go.
Okay, so could you make the dough and then store that in the fridge and then like bake it?
Yep, so here's the question. Can you make the dough and store it in the fridge? The answer is yes and no. Yes, you can make the dough and store it in the fridge. So when you get it cold, it stops the rising process. So if you were to put that in the fridge right now, it wouldn't rise as fast. It still will rise a little bit, but it won't rise as fast. So you could put it in the fridge and store it. And when you're ready to make it, pull it out, let it warm up, and then you'll see it rise. And I would take this and put it in either 2 or 3 loaf pans. Let that rise to about double height, and then shove it in the oven. And then all the instructions on how long and stuff are on each individual recipe.
You said that one right there makes one loaf?
This will make, so a 1 pound loaf, it'll make 3 of those loaves.
Oh, wow.
Oh.
Yeah. But the Zojirushi bread machine is like makes one big fat loaf. I've got little tiny, like banana muffin, not muffin, banana bread kind of pans. I don't know what you call them. Actually, if you want a really good bread pan, the American bread, or American, I don't know what they're called. That's a good bread pan. someone gave me 2 of them, and I had that, and then the one that's not that, and 2 of them I don't have to grease or do anything. I like turn upside down, they fall out, and the other one is a disaster every time. So I haven't figured out how to grease my pans or whatever yet, but I prefer the ones that I don't have to do that to. So, American, you know what? I'll put it on the list of. I'll add that. I'll add that on there. So what I've done is I've created all the stuff that you saw in this presentation. I've combined into a PDF, sort of succinct PDF. So I'll provide that to the emails that you're going to reply to everyone on. And then I'll just reply to that same email with that PDF on it, so everyone will get the PDF with all the resources linked out with links on it and simple stuff. And I'll add those bread pans to it because they're good. Any other questions? Yes?
How long would you bake it for?
How long would you bake it for? This one says you would bake it for 35 to 40 minutes. 350 degrees. So each one of the recipes will have that in there, in that book. This one, yeah.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Yeah, bake it 350 degrees for 45 to 50 minutes for loaf pans and 35 to 40 minutes for brownie pans, and depending on what kind of pan you put it in. Or if you have it in the Zoji Rushi machine, there's settings for that specifically. Any other questions? Yes?
So biblically, how would they make that?
Biblically, how would they make it?
How would they?
You want to answer this, Gail?
Well, biblically is a long period of time, but first century, a lot of the stuff was you'd have a fire in the ground. I don't know if you've ever seen an Indian naan bread being made. Can you guys hear me over here? But you can.
Gail, you want to come use the microphone?
Well, I don't know a lot about it. But mostly in the ground, dug in the ground, and then fire, and then you'd bake in there. Yeah, that's about the extent of my knowledge on it.
Yeah, so they would not have a Zoji Rushi machine.
That is their Zoji Rushi.
Yeah, that is their Zoji Rushi machine. So open fire and some sort of a covering. I don't know what kind of oven. I imagine it or liken it to like an old pizza oven type thing. That's what I imagine. I'm probably wrong, but I spent a lot of time in Central and South America building those ovens, and I know that you can make those ovens out of dirt and straw and make an oven that you can cook pizza in, and so I sort of imagine it to be like a pizza oven kind of thing. But I don't know if that's true or not.
YouTube it, right?
Yeah, YouTube it. There you go.
So you either do the bread maker or pop it in the oven. Either way.
Yeah. So either have the Zoji Rushi bread maker machine, or get some loaf pans and pop in the oven. The cool thing about the loaf pans is that you can begin to sort of experiment with the different bread knots and those type things, which are fun. This one you can't because of the consistency of the dough. But when you get just like the basic dough recipe, you can make little like monkey balls or the cool knot, the challah knot. Yeah. Yes, more questions?
Mine's not a question, it's just literally just a thought that's coming to me right now. But just when I was mentioning earlier about, the grape and the gut health, and you're talking about the whole meal with the bread. So just on the subject of communion, when the Lord says, every time you eat the bread and drink of the cup, think of me, just the completeness of healing it is at every single meal, of being actually a communion meal, because you're not just communing spiritually with the Lord, but you're actually providing the healing for your physical body as well, blessed by the Spirit. So anyways, it just seems like that's pretty cool.
Yeah, what a cool revelation. Amen. Do you have anything?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't know if you've ever heard of Nazareth Village in Israel, but if you Google Nazareth Village, it's an actual village that's a first century replicated village, and it'll have what the ovens would have looked like in there. That's probably the best place to know what a first century oven would have looked like.
So if you want to know what an oven looks like in the first century, go to Nazareth Village. Thank you. Any other questions? Love you guys. God bless.